Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
Podcast for parents and families everywhere.
whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students. You want them in and you want them to graduate.
And you want a quality education that leads to a quality job. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent. It is Thursday, February 28th, and this is episode number 57, How to Make Your Activity Stand Out in Your Application. In this week's news, new front in college admissions, nudging students to decide early. And we're in chapter 57 of 171 answers, and we're talking through how your child can showcase their passions in the application process. And this week's question is from a listener who wants to know more about open enrollment at four-year colleges. And we're in part 3 of Mark's interview with Dr. David Williams. So you want to be a doctor or nurse? What you need to know.
Okay, friends, if you've listened to our last 2 episodes, you know I've been doing something in our little intro. I've been sharing something from a study that was done at Cornell University of 1,500 people, age 65. They call it the Legacy Project, asking them what their regrets were in life. In other words, if they had to live their life all over again, what they would do differently. So we're trying to learn from that so that we don't have to make those mistakes. So I'm reading the regrets, counting them down, and Anika's given us some commentary here. So the first one, number 8, was not taking care of the body. Number 7 was not taking enough risk with your career chances. And drumroll, please, number 6, not being honest in life. What do you think, Anika?
Ooh, can you say that one more again?
Not being honest. Going to bed with the guilty conscience.
Oh, my goodness gracious. In all aspects and facets of personal and work life.
That's true. We could go deep on that, whether it's taxes, work, we better just move off that. That might be too hot of a topic to handle. So.
No, I got to tell you this absolute favorite meme of mine now. I saw on the internet. So this lady, she posed, she says, you know what? This world, she said, y'all are so shameful. You're cheating on your taxes. I can't stand it. She said, this is not the world I want my 29 dependents to, I want to raise my 29 dependents in. That's what she said. I thought that was hilarious.
Oh, that was good.
Honesty.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All right, Mark, this week's article is entitled New Front in College Admissions, Nudging Students to Decide Early. And this is by Mr. Douglas Belkin. He wrote in the Wall Street Journal, I believe. And so colleges are interesting enough reaching out to students who apply through the regular decision round, and they're encouraging them to apply through the school's next early decision round. So one university cited in here, Lehigh University, explained this tactic as, we're just reminding students of their options. Yeah, right. And then where, of course, counselors, students, and parents read this as being, they're being pressured into make a commitment. Mark, there's a dean in this article at Tulane University that just went on record saying, you know what, at the end of the day, I have a responsibility to my institution, which I thought was so messed up. And I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to let you dive in on this, Mark, because I agree with, there's a lady in here also, Sarah, I think it's Haberson. Mm-hmm. And she's a private admissions counselor in Pennsylvania. And she's saying that these schools that are doing this what they're doing is that they're tapping into students' vulnerabilities just to only strengthen themselves, like to, just all about themselves. Like this guy said, at the end of the day, it's about the institution. Like, is this some messed up stuff or what? It's crazy. And I did not realize that was happening.
I'm only laughing because when you get my commentary on this, you're gonna think I'm a little twisted. I'm just telling you.
Mark, don't you talk about at the end of the day, you committed to those institutions. Oh my goodness gracious. Please tell us what's on your mind.
I'll tell you. So the first thing I want to say is I'm really, really excited about this in the news section for a lot of reasons. One, my whole life, I'd never subscribed to the Wall Street Journal before. And I decided to do it. And oh my goodness, they have some outstanding college admissions writers.
Mm.
And so you're going to, hear a lot of articles that we have selected from the Wall Street Journal. And one of their best writers is Douglas Belkin, who penned this article. And I love all of their articles because they're very succinct. But what I like about them is they just seem to just touch the nerve as to what is really going on out there. They're so relevant. And so this is one. Another reason I'm excited is, we've done 60 of these in the news discussions so far. And you might think, wait a minute, you're on like episode 57. How can you do 60? Well, Nick, remember the first 4 episodes when we did two per episode?
Flashback. Oh my God. How we do that? Yeah.
And we were like, I don't think we're going to make it to 171 at this pace because there's a lot of research to prepare. So
yeah.
So we cut that out really quick after 4. So we've done over 60 of these in the news. And a reason why I like this article so much, and I'm about to go deep on something here. Nick, I've given a lot of thought to what is it that the public doesn't know about admissions. Like I think the public knows that stuff happens behind the scenes, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's true of every organization, right? Your own company you work for, like stuff's happening behind the scenes that the average person doesn't know about at the board level. And I've given a lot of thought to that. And this is my opinion, but I think there are 2 really huge things that the public doesn't know about college admissions. And I feel this article both directly and indirectly touches on both of those. So the first is how important yield is. Do you remember what yield was, Anika?
Mm-hmm. How many students actually accept and attend your school?
Yeah. So I was, just to be a little more technically accurate, it's the percentage of students that accept your offer.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I say that is because if it's a small school, they might yield 150 kids, but at a big school they might yield 10,000 kids. So it's more about the percentage, right? The percentage of students that accept your offer. Yield drives everything because you have to be able to plan. I don't want to go into depth too much in that because we talked about that last week when we talked about why early decision was so valuable. Do you remember how we talked about all the stakeholders you have to please?
Mm-hmm.
So the first is yield is everything because there's no way you can possibly plan, not just the number of kids, but satisfying all the groups you have to satisfy. So that's essential. And the second thing that people don't know is that while schools are nonprofits, and they do exist with a mission to serve humanity, they're also businesses, right? And they have to be run as businesses. So they care about the kids, but to be crass, they're going to cover their own butt before they cover your butt. I'm just putting it out there. And their own financial health and the pressure to please certain constituencies forces colleges to do some things that are not in your best interest, but they are in their best interest for their own survival. And what I feel that this article does is it exposes both of these things, how important yield is and the business side of the school. So I want to go back and read a couple of the quotes to me that jumped off the page and then kind of do a deep dive into it. And I want you to stop me if I'm not explaining anything clearly or if anything's confusing. We want to serve all the students, but at the end of the day, now you refer to this, I'm the dean of admissions and I have a responsibility to my institution, said Data Gupta, the dean of admissions at Tulane. I'm going to come back to that. So what happened through this tactic of identifying students who they had already applied and asking if they wanted to apply early decision, Tulane, they said that to 625 students, and they ended up getting 95 more students that were locked in by doing that. So let's just kind of keep in mind on that. Here's another quote by Mark Hatch at Colorado College, the vice president of enrollment. And he is one of the ones whose, schools is doing that. This is a runaway train, talking about the push to get kids to apply early decision. Actually, let me go back. He says we are all pushing early decision right now. Not when he says all, he means all of us out here that offer it for enrollment. He said, this is a runaway train and it's not going to stop. And I completely agree with him. It is not going to stop. I'll explain more a little while I say that in a second. So those are a couple. And then of course, there's the quote you said about tapping into vulnerabilities. And so a lot of these criticisms are valid, right? So if you look at things strictly from the student's perspective, it doesn't feel fair, because what you're doing is you're trying to get people to commit to the school before they had a chance to compare their aid offers.
Mhm.
So purely from a student standpoint, that feels like squishy at best, or you know what it feels like? It feels like a little bit of a high pressure tactic maybe you get at a car salesman.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? You know,
Right.
right? Right? It feels that way. But let me give it to you from the school's perspective. So, on one of the downsides of the common application, and one of the downsides of all the frenzy around how hard it is to get into certain select institutions, is it just leads kids to applying to more and more schools. Well, as the kids apply to more and more schools, yield goes down. And I think we talked about this once before. You go back to 2003, and colleges were yielding almost 1 and 2 students. Now they're yielding more closer to 1 and 3. That changes everything. I was listening to an admission officer at a school in Vermont, and he was talking about a student he was having a conversation with, and it came up how many colleges she's applying to, and she said 45, and he was like, what am I supposed to do with that?
Mm.
Like, I've got to bring kids in. I got a 1 in 45 chance at getting this person, you know?
Mm.
And so that's just so overwhelming for school. It's basically untenable. They cannot run their operation that way. And so, I was talking to another one of my a client I work with in Manhattan, and I pulled up the data for the school that he applied to. And I actually crunched the data, and I showed him, and I showed this school only gets 1 out of every 8 kids that they admit.
Mm.
So what that means is you can expect all kinds of things to be done to try to get you to commit. And you can expect your demonstrated interest to be tracked. So, the more apps they get, the more schools are going to try to lock in. Now, here's something from my own story that I have to share. And it's not necessarily something, this is going to sound like it's contradictory.
Mm.
It's not necessarily something that I'm proud of, Anika, but it's not something that I would have done any different. So here it goes. So when I was in admissions, we had 9 in our office, counting administrative staff, 5 that hit the road and did the traveling. I was the main road runner. I was the main one out there traveling, what we call our road warrior. I loved the travel. It was great. I loved it. After 3 years, I became the director of recruitment, meaning I designed our own recruitment strategy. And I had a mix of territories. I had like the wealthiest communities in the country, like the Lake Forest and the Far Hill, New Jerseys, and I had to go in there and get recruit great students that could stroke a check and pay 50 grand and go to boarding school. But I also recruited higher need kids, that needed, heavy financial aid offers. And so when it came to the heavy need, those large aid awards, the director in the office was like, look, we're going to put out a certain number of these offers just financially to manage the budget, right? We're going to put out maybe 10 offers a year, like that are almost full packages. But then she would say, guess what? If those kids commit, great. It's great to have them. It'll add to our socioeconomic diversity. But if they don't commit, then probably going to take those $50,000 offers and break them into like 10 $5,000 offers, because we're going to have all these people that are going to appeal for their more money. And if we are able to give them an extra 5,000, it could be the difference between them coming and not coming. So I could get 10 families for that 50,000, or I could get 1. So what that meant to me, as someone who's pretty passionate about having socioeconomic diversity and all types of diversity on the campus, that I wanted those people who we admitted to come. So what did that mean? It meant basically that I did stuff similar to what you see in the article.
Mm.
I did. Like, I would say, okay, I'm extremely interested in you, and I'd be working with the organization. Think of it like the college counselor. It's just the college counselor on the 8th grade level, right? The placement director. I'd say, I'm extremely interested in these 2 kids, but which one's going to come? And as you know, Anika, I do boarding school admissions as well. And this conversation happens to me all the time. They want to know, okay, these are the kids. Which one's going to come? We like them both. Why? Because of the need to be able to control yield from a budgetary standpoint. They can't go over the budget, and you don't want to have nobody that you enroll and admit that, that comes from that, whoever it is you're trying to target. I mean, you look at all of athletes, the same things with athletic recruitment. It's very common for a coach to say, if you apply early decision, I can advocate for you before the admissions committee, but if you go regular, I can't. Like, that's a strong arm tactic, and people may not like it, but it's necessary for survival, because if the coach doesn't get the talent, he gets fired and they lose.
Mm.
So if you purely look at this only from the student standpoint exclusively, it doesn't seem fair. It doesn't seem right. But if you understand how important yield is to a school, if you understand the business side to a school, then you'll understand why schools do some of these things. I'll share a real quick conversation with story I had, true story. So there are two schools in Philadelphia area. One's called Penn Charter, one called Germantown Friends. They're both very strong academic schools. They're schools that we kind of overlapped with. And I was talking to the admission director at Penn Charter. Now, both these schools are very academic, but Penn Charter is the athletic school. They've put people in the NFL. Germantown Friends is like that pure academician intellectual school. And the director of admissions told me, I'm so sick and tired of having to go up against Germantown Friends for like a pure academic kid, not somebody into athletics. Okay? Because every time I do, I don't get my first choice. So I'm sick of it. So I'm just going to go for my second choice because I offer my first choice. I don't get them. And by the time I try to go after my second choice, they're gone. They went somewhere else. So I feel like I've been talking for a while. I want to get your, I know I can talk. But everybody knows that who listens to our podcast. I'm a talker. What can I say?
And that's why we're
change. Here. You know what, Nika? Nika, I remember one time you described yourself on a podcast as a 40-something. Remember that?
I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'm a 50-something, okay? I'm a 50-something. So a 50-something has a lot of years of habit. But I want to get some feedback from you. But I can assure you, as people apply to more and more schools, which all the research shows the average number of students apply to more schools, that makes it harder and harder and harder for schools to figure out who's coming. And that's going to lead to more and more focus on demonstrated interest and more focus on tactics to try to get people to commit. And I was listening to, a Syracuse University admission officer just this week, and he was being asked about this. And he basically said, we have to do this for our survival. Like, we have to figure out who's likely to come and make decisions with that in mind, or, we won't be able to run our whole operation. Mm-hmm. So what are you thinking?
I'm going to be honest and tell you, I really don't care about the perspective. All I care about is this child going into this commitment. And I feel like, I get it, business is business, but I do feel like there's always an opportunity to strike a balance as long as that family understands.
Correct.
As long as there's that level of communication to say, hey, this is what you're getting yourself into. And as long as that child has, right. I'm sure it's not like, okay, we're going to offer you at 9:30 and 9:33, you got to make your decision. So
no, it's not like
as long as that family is totally educated on what that means and what they could be turning themselves away from, then, I can deal with the business aspect of it. But all I'm saying is that these kids that are getting into these situations, like, when we talked about, I think last week or whenever it was, about not even doing their research, like not even having visited the school. So you're going to commit to a school you've never even been to? Like, I wouldn't. No, I think that all have the, still have the consciousness is to still be mindful of that family and of that kid to make sure they understand what they're getting themselves into. That's all I'm saying.
No, and I completely, it's funny. I think both sides are right. I agree with that as well. And if you notice, like, if you go back to that quote, let's go back one more time to that quote from Tulane. Because I thought he was so spot on. Basically, what he was saying was, I'm getting like roasted in these message boards because of the fact that we're doing this, right? So this is what the Dean of Tulane says. He said, I've had discussions at forums about this complaint. We do want to serve all students. But at the end of the day, I've got a responsibility to my institution. So basically, he's acknowledging like there's legitimacy. Everybody knows the whole early decision process. It favors affluent families that don't need to compare aid offers. There is some legislation in place right now to try to make it illegal because there's some partiality there. It favors a family that doesn't need to compare aid offers. It favors a family that has the money and the resources to travel early and get to all these schools. But you're not going to see it go away unless it's legislated, because it is so important for a school to be able to figure out who's going to come. And so I don't disagree with you, Anika, that this feels very, very, very uncomfortable. And I don't like the idea of, and I'll say I did not do this. I did not try to get people to commit that I didn't think they knew what they're getting into. Right. They hadn't visited, so I'll say that. But I do want to say this, and then we can transition. So what can the public do about this?
What do you mean from a personal level, like when they're going out and they're being approached with these offers, is they need to know what they need to know. They just need to know how it works. You're if you're committing yourself to that, you're taking everything else off the table. And what does that mean for you as a family? Period. And that's unique to a lot of people.
So I think that's part of it. But another part, there are some other things you can do. Obviously, you can do your research as much as possible, which is kind of what you said, right? But you can also position yourself so that you're such a strong applicant that they have to take you in a regular admission round. And one of the ways you do that is you have a realistic list of schools. So, for example, Anika, there are times when I meet with the family, they're like, I got to apply early. I got to apply early because it's easier to get in. Remember I said last week that's like saying, I got to get married at 21, but I don't know to whom yet. And so there are a lot of times that I say to families, pump the brakes. I don't want you doing that because you haven't done your research. So we're not saying like, oh, you got to apply early to get, just everybody's getting ahead. No, what I'm saying is you can actually build your list in a way that you can apply regular and be a strong enough applicant. But what gets people in trouble is when they build unrealistic lists and then they get shut out in early and in regular.
Here it is. Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, friends, we are talking about how to stand out in your application with your activities, often called extracurriculars. And so one of the things I'm trying to do, Anika, I'm trying to train my brain to not call them extracurriculars. And the reason for that is there's a new movement out there, and I really respect this movement a lot. And that this is how the movement goes. It's from your schools, some of your most selective schools that do what I call full-blown holistic admissions. And what they say is traditionally when we say extracurriculars, people think of playing lacrosse or something like that, right? They think of like a design set activity. But they said not everybody has the money to play lacrosse. I mean, lacrosse is expensive. My brother, my nephew is in Denver. My brother and my only brother were really close. And he zigzags all around the country. He's out in San Diego. Then he's been to Philadelphia twice in the last year for lacrosse tournaments. That's expensive. So what this movement says is instead of calling it extracurriculars, which focuses on fixed events and things that you do, usually structured activities, what we're really interested in is how you spend your time outside of class. So if you don't have any money and you have to go babysit your 8-year-old because your mom has to take a second job, that matters to us. If you have to work 30 hours a week, that matters to us. So this is kind of the new movement that's happening. So the idea is how do you stand out in your activities, right? And I wrote down a list of things, and I want to say a few and get your feedback. So one would be start researching, the different things pretty early in the school. Opportunities are there, the clubs, the activities, all that stuff, so that you can get involved early. And then you want to stick with it unless it's just miserable. And then you want to try to move into leadership if you can, and possibly consider starting an organization if it's in an area of interest to you. But it's very, 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 very important that you're not just resume padding here, that you're actually doing something that makes sense. That's one of the pet peeves of any admission officers. Is this kid just doing this because they think it looks good, or do they really want to be there? So those are 5 really quick right there. Researching early, getting involved, stick with it, try to move into leadership, consider starting your own org. What do you think about anything there you want to comment on?
I like I want to reiterate the point about the resume padding, because it drove me crazy, when I was going through with Jalen early on, just trying to figure out what those extra things were. And it was miserable to just be sitting there because, we thought we were just going through the motions. So it was annoying to us as a family. And we just had to move on and, and find his thing. But that always comes through. Like, it always comes through when you're not genuine in what you're calling your passion. It's going to come out one day or another. It's going to come out, whether it's in an interview or whether it's you're just in conversation with peers or whatever. And it's just not worth. It's absolutely not worth just trying to do something just to be doing it. I can say that firsthand.
I agree 100%. And I was really happy. I picked this new client up about 3 or 4 months ago in Philadelphia, and when I first, maybe it was my second session, I was meeting with the mom and the daughter, and then she says to me, I hope you're not going to tell my kid to start some club so that they so that they can look good, in their college application. because we're not doing that.
Right.
And I was like really happy that she understood like the need to be authentic, And also I want to make a point, which is exactly your point. So the sixth thing that I would say, and this is very important, this is a missed opportunity for students all the time. Get to know your college counselor or your school counselor very well. Why? They're going to have to write about you when they complete their secondary school report. And schools rely on the counselor to put the student not only in the context of the school, like how does curriculum compare to other curriculums, what's the grading scale, discipline, all this other stuff, but they actually expect the counselor to be the one to say, oh, and you should hear their voice. They had an amazing role in our theater performance, and they're a standout. And so now you're thinking, how's the counselor supposed to know all this stuff? Well, starts with you building a relationship with them, okay?
Right.
And then another thing I like to do is have the student develop, some people call it a brag sheet. I call it activity resume. That's really, really good. And so you can present that because a lot of times a counselor will learn things from looking at that. Maybe they'll ask you about it. So maybe they don't learn by watching you, but they learn through asking you, what was this? Tell me about it. Da, da, da. And then, and it ends up getting included.
Okay.
But I was listening to a dean of admission at a school in Texas. And you know how you said, Anika, just like 2 minutes ago, how it always comes through if you're not genuine, if you're not sincere. And what she was saying is, you know what she looks for to indicate whether or not somebody is sincere about their activities is, does the counselor talk about it? And she said, if I'm seeing a student hype it up like I was all this in a bag of chips and make them sound like they, the greatest thing since sliced bread in terms of their contributions, and then I read the counselor rec and there's not even any mention of it at all, I'm going to question what your contributions were.
Wow.
So, yeah. So, but if you don't know your counselor, then you maybe are their greatest thing from sliced bread, and they might not know about it.
All right.
So getting to know your counselor is huge. Developing the activity resume is really, really big. Submit the activity resume to the counselor. Here's some more things that are really important. Especially the Common App Coalition, you have an opportunity in your activities section to describe your activities. Properly describe them. One of the biggest pet peeves admission officers, and I use the term admission officers and admission counselors as euphemisms, right? So I'll use them interchangeably. If people hear me say admission officer or admission counselor, just understand that's the same thing. I like to think of myself as an admission counselor, but anyway, just know when I say those two, those are not different things. But one of the pet peeves you'll hear is you put down on your activity list, which is right in there. You got to put your activities there. You put down some name of some organization, and you think that everybody knows what that is. Like one of the students I worked with this year, they have a really, really high role in this organization called GLT. And every time I talk to a GLT teacher, I'm like, sometimes I have to say, I don't know what that is, right? You explain it to me.
Right.
So this is a common thing because, you get so used to just throwing it around. So you got to properly describe it. You got to put it down. Then it asks you to put them in order according to what's important to you. A lot of people don't even think about that. They just throw them on there. You got to put some thought into that order, because the truth of the matter is this is the way most admission counselors think. Look, I know the Common App gives you 10 activities, but guess what? There's not enough time in the day for you to make major contributions in 10 areas. There just isn't. So I'm looking at your first 3. That's why I'm looking. I might look at 4 and 5, maybe, but anything down after that, like that wasn't probably where your passion really lied. So put them in proper order. And then here's another mistake people make. There's an opportunity in the Common App to have 650 additional words where you can talk about anything. So a lot of times students complain, like this little activity section that you have where you put them in order.
Yeah,
you have like 150 characters. You know how short that is, Anika? Not words, characters. So people are like, I'm running out of room. I just started talking around the room. You know what? Use the additional info session. Do you realize that the overwhelming majority of people just leave that additional information section blank? That's an opportunity where you can go in more, but they don't know because they don't know that the way, first of all, I think part of it is the way it's written. It kind of makes it sound like if you have something that you have not had a chance to explain, and it makes it sound like it needs to be this really significant thing. And so a lot of people, I think partly the way it's written, and then partly, and this is where I fault admission counselors a little bit. If you listen to a presentation from an admission counselor, and they talk about the additional information section, they kind of make it, they'll tell you to use it, but most of the time they'll say like, okay, if you got like a really bad grade in a class because your grandparent died, like explain that to us, because otherwise we can't read minds, and put that down there. But most of the time they don't say you need to use that, because there's lots of things you can put in there that are valuable, because they look at it like, I don't want to create all this extra work for myself, for people just
Right.
filling in stuff that they just because I told them to do it. So if you hear a presentation, most of the time they won't tell you to definitely do it. As a counselor,
Mhm.
I'm telling you to definitely do it. And that's a place where you can describe in more detail what you actually did.
Okay.
So any thoughts on anything I shared there so far?
No, I think that point about that section is critical, because and now that you say that, I can clearly see how that can be perceived that way. It's like, oh, if I have to explain myself on something, then that's the opportunity to do that. Otherwise, it's just okay, moving on. Yeah, I get it.
Cool.
We would like to thank all of our amazing listeners for your comments, for sharing your stories, and for the tremendous feedback on how our episodes have impacted your lives. We are so humbled by you, and we are 100% committed to helping fill the void in education around the college admissions process. So now, to help offset some of the considerable production costs for the show, we are asking for your financial support.
We are very excited to introduce 2 very nominal levels of support that will allow us to remain commercial free and to meet the various expenses that it takes to produce this show. You can show your support by investing in either of our Sustainer gift level, which is only $5 per month, or the Enhancer gift level, which is only $10 a month. And if you would like to give a larger monthly gift or a one-time gift, you can absolutely do that as well.
So at our $5 a month Sustainer gift level, this is what you're going to get. We're going to recognize you for your support on our website, and you'll receive an invitation to participate in a private group video college presentation that will happen in the month of January. And we're going to mail you 2 beautiful Your College Bound Kid notebooks, one for you and one for your student. And for our $10 a month Enhancer gift level supporters, you're going to get all of that at the Sustainer plan level, in addition to a 30-minute private one-on-one video college session with Mark on any admissions topic that you would like to cover. And also an amazing opportunity for a 100-word shout out on the show to recognize the hard work of your student.
It's so easy to support the show. Just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and select Donate from our website menu. Again, we thank you so much for your support, and we deeply appreciate any and all gifts that will allow us to keep going commercial free.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. So a couple more things. Outside recommendations. I love them. What do you think I mean by outside recommendation, Anika?
Well, anybody outside of your school, I always try to find another example, but it's always like an outside coach. Like if your kid is running like AAU or doing something, outside of the school, or maybe even a pastor or somebody, just somebody in the community that's not in the classroom with them all the time.
So that's very, 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 very good answer. I'll just slightly tweak it. Because the recommendations it asks for are explicitly teacher recs,
Mm-hmm.
then an outside rec actually can even be somebody in the school but not a teacher. So you could,
Really?
I
didn't know that.
yeah. So you could use like your high school track coach. That's a great one as well.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So anybody outside of the teacher and the counselor, that is a fantastic way to pick someone in an area. Like, let's say you were passionate about chess and you made all these major contributions, and you could go to most clubs have like a faculty mentor, right? That just sort of oversees the thing from an adult standpoint. They could write it like, and I love to get them from employers. Employers are great. Now, I personally do like to get them outside of the school when possible, because I think it shows sort of the outside the school, inside the school perspective. But the more important thing is that it's someone that knows you really well and is, what I call a raving fan, like someone who's going to, speak to your strengths. Like take in the school if they know you well and they're a raving fan, then outside the school if they don't know you that well or they're a little bit tepid on your contributions. So that's really powerful. So friends of the show know last week we had my good friend Dave Williams on. He's on this week as well. And one of the things that Dave did, he's actually working with another student I'm working with. I'm going to call him Roger just for confidentiality purposes. But Roger works with Dave in the emergency medical room, right? He volunteers in there. He wants to be a doc. And And he's an
Wow.
amazing kid. And so Dave voluntarily said, I would love to tell the college admissions offices how
Hmm.
awesome you are. So that's a great example, like someone, your person who's overseeing your volunteerism, you know? And so those are some things that that you can really do to really make yourself stand out. And the last thing I want to share in this, and then I'll see if you have any comments. So, we talk about a lot of aspects of the admission process, right, Anika? We're talking about essays, we're talking about recs, and we're talking about curriculum, we're talking about scores, we're talking about grades, and we're talking about subject tests, and we're talking about demonstrated interest, talking about outside, right? We go on and on and on, right? There's lots and lots of things, especially for schools that do what I call full-blown holistic admissions. Now, would it make sense if a school is going to take all of these things and put them under 3 rubrics? That those 3 rubrics would be important. Would that make sense if you're to distill all of these different things and put them into 3 categories?
Okay.
Would it make sense that those 3 would be important?
I would think so, but
No, the answer is yes. So that was I have hardball questions and softball ones.
is that a trick?
That was a softball one. No trick. No trick. So for example, like when I did admissions, actually I got to design our own rating system. It was really fun because I like stuff like that. So I studied all the college models. I narrowed down to like 9, and then I ended up presenting one, and everybody went with it. It was a 3-tiered model. And we basically went with, we have an academic rating, so you get rated 1 to 9 on your academics. We had a personal rating, 1 to 9 on your personal, and then we called it extracurricular, but extracurricular activity rating 1 to 9. So if you go with our model, then 1/3 of the rating was going to be on this area where we're going to ask, how are you going to impact people outside the classroom? And I just stole from the colleges. That's all I did. I looked at college models. But I'm going to give you a slight variation, but it's the same thing, and it shows how important this is. So another model that's out there that some schools use, and I really like this, one of their 3 whole tiers in their whole rating system is called impact in my space, right? So 1/3 of the whole rating where you get a score is impact in my space. What is impact in my space? It looks at, is this a student that was a game changer in their school outside of the academic environment? And I'm only bringing that up to show that this stuff can be the difference between who gets in and who gets a wait list. What are you thinking?
That's a powerful statement right there. Take heed. That's all I can say.
Before we transition, I have a question I've been meaning to ask you. I need your honesty.
You'll get it.
Are you having fun with the admission process?
No. And the only reason why I'm not, I can't say I'm not having fun.
Okay.
I have this innate sense of anxiety.
I know that. I know that, but I didn't want to put your stuff out there on blast for the whole world. So you brought it up.
I so own it. I own every ounce of it. And Lil Jon, I still got Lil Jon, and it's just like, man, I gotta do this again. If it was like my last one, I'd be like, woo, finish line, yeah, let's go. So I'm just kind of thinking about Jon right now. Like, even though I'm like, we're in like high, tip of the iceberg with Janaea, it's just like, dang, I got to do this again.
So let me tell you why I asked you that. Because I sense that sometimes. Like when I went through the process, I mean, it was a blast. I loved it. This process should be fun. It should be exhilarating. Like the times that I spent with my kids going through it. And I'm putting this on me, not on you, Anika. I know you say you got this, anxiety, but I don't want to so emphasize all these things that you're like, another thing I got to do, and another thing, and another thing. And so I'm wondering if I need to maybe change my communication style a little bit so that I don't add to people's stress level, because what I'm trying to do is decrease people's stress level, because knowledge is power. And as you get knowledge, it should diffuse the stress. But I don't want to make people think, because at the end of the day, I really truly believe that it's not where you go, it's what you do when you get there, when you get out of there. Like every school has unlimited opportunities. So, use this information to get the match right as best as possible. But at the end of the day, go rock it wherever you go. But so, And friends, we're just being really transparent. This is the kind of conversation I would normally have with Anika offline.
No,
But
let's do
we're
it.
doing a little counseling session on the air here. So this is my question to you. What can I do so that you are not feeling like angst and anxiety and having fun? Because I think this process with your child should be one of the most memorable, experiences that you have.
Right.
And
Well, I tell you what. I
anyway,
tell you what I
what do
want
you
to
think?
do. I want to actually give a thoughtful response, and I want to think about that, and I want to come back and
Okay.
I want to tell you that next week. Seriously.
Okay, I like that. That's
Yeah,
fair. That's
let's
fair.
do that.
But I'm holding you
Oh
accountable to
yeah, I'm
that.
on it. I'm on it.
And so all the listeners will get emails.
The billions of people that are listening right now.
Oh, and this is not a strategy to get people to come back next week.
What kind it is?
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Mark, this week's question is from Rob in Georgetown, Texas. And Rob wants to know, he's asking Mark for more information about open enrollment at four-year colleges. Now, that sounds pretty vague, Mark. Do you have is there some, how are you going to tackle that?
Oh, well, I'm really glad that he asked that, because, sometimes I get concerned sometimes, Anika, when we talk so much about all the strategy and all these things that schools look for to differentiate one school from another, because I feel sometimes that I'm feeding that frenzy out there that college is so hard to get into. Like, why is it that I can be working with a good, solid, like 3.3 student, and they get in a college, they get their first college admission acceptance, and there's like, oh, they're like relieved. They're like, oh, at least I'm going to college. And I'm like, what are we doing in our communication to make it sound like every school is so hard to get in? A couple tidbits of information. Let me share. That came out recently on survey research. One survey done by Gallup in conjunction with Inside Higher Ed showed that more than 60% of colleges, Anika, are not full at June 1st. So you know how we say May 1st is a National Candidate Reply Day?
Right.
So, yeah, overwhelmingly, they're not full then, but they're not full June 1st. Now, remember, a lot of these schools are starting to go to orientation, in 60 days, and they're still not full. And the trepidation that produces on the budget.
Right.
And I'm saying that to say, and here's another stat. More than 90% of school professionals who were surveyed and they were asked, are you worried about full enrollment for next year? More than 90% of colleges said yes. It was broken down a little more than 55%. There was almost an even split between people that said, I'm seriously concerned versus I'm considerably concerned.
Okay.
So there was degrees of concern. But I'm saying all that to say, most colleges are not these schools that are even looking at all of these activities and additional recs. That's for the people that want to go for about 300 to 400 schools out there, right? That's only the top 10% of colleges. So there's this other percent. So now with that background, I appreciate it, Rob's question. And, I lived in Texas and I didn't even know where Georgetown was. So I looked it up and there's 70,000 people in Georgetown and it's really close to Austin. So I don't know how I lived in Texas for 7.5 years and didn't even know about Georgetown. But thanks, Rob, for this question. Let's talk about open admission. Now, remember, Nika drove you crazy with all those names last week for 15 ways to apply? And you're like, you admission people need to get your act together and settle on standard terminology. Remember that?
Yes.
Well, you're not gonna like this answer, but but the term open enrollment is sometimes called open admission, sometimes called inclusive admission, and sometimes called guaranteed acceptance. They all mean the same thing. If you hear open admission, open enrollment, inclusive enrollment, guaranteed acceptance, same thing. What does it mean? Open admission generally means that the admission process is not selective and it's non-competitive, and that the only criteria for admission is that the student have a high school diploma or a GED. And most of the schools that practice open admission are community colleges or colleges that grant associate degrees. So there are schools that grant both associate degrees, 2-year degrees, and 4-year degrees. So that's most of them.
Okay.
And now when it comes to what students, let me ask you, what type of students do you think would apply to these schools? What do you think?
I'm going to say a wider range, right, of academic, strengths. I would think that's my thought.
Well, let me ask it this way because it's a more accurate way to ask it. what would be the reasons a student would go to a school that has an open enrollment policy, open admission policy?
Because it's rigid. You don't have those deadlines. You don't have the early deadlines. You don't have the regular deadlines. You can just kind of not be on your, oh God, I hate to say it that way, because I don't want to say that people that apply to open enrollment aren't on their A game. But the point is that there's opportunity for everybody, like literally for everybody.
No, well, I mean, you're not may not be precise in your diction, but you're getting the essence of it right. So basically, students that go don't have the grades to get into competitive institutions.
Right.
That's the biggest reason. They also miss deadlines, and the other reason they go is because these schools are significantly less expensive. Significantly less expensive. Most of the time, your open enrollment schools, and this applies to your 4-year schools and your 2-year schools, most of the time they're commuter schools. So you right away, you take off room and board. When you're looking at room and board anywhere in the country, you're pretty much looking at $9,000 to $19,000. Like it's going to be in that 9 to 19 range. You'll find it more up like toward the 19s when you get into like the New Yorks and the DCs and the LAs, right? And it's the cost of living. And so, and 9 is on the low side. Usually you're doing a bare bones meal plan and maybe you're, 3 in a dorm kind of thing. So there's a range in there, but that's a big expense, 9 and 19. And so you save on that, but also these are generally not places that pay the professors a lot of money. So the costs are down and they don't have a lot of them don't have intercollegiate sports at all. And they're certainly not spending all this money on their athletic programs. So, but they can be great places to go. You still get an education for the right student. And sometimes people go and transfer into 4-year schools. And sometimes people just go and stay there. They can offer 4-year degrees and 2-year degrees, either way. So there's some things that people need to know, though, if they're looking at an open enrollment school. And because if you think open enrollment, open admissions, I'm guaranteed in. Well, it's actually possible that they could have more applicants than spots. So there are sometimes students that do get waitlisted. So for that reason, deadlines are still important and application requirements are still important even for open admission schools. Because if you have too many, you have too many, right? And another thing to know is that these are not schools that require the SAT or ACT. So a lot of times, if I work with a student, they ends up going to an open enrollment school, it's because they never got the SAT or ACT requirements to get in. Like Georgia has strict requirements to go to the schools in the state. And a lot of times students I work with, particularly at KIPP, if they don't have those scores, then they still want to go to college, then they'll go to an open enrollment school. Okay, so that's pretty common because you're going to be, they might have their own test, but if they do, it's nowhere near as hard as an ACT or an SAT. So you should expect to take a placement test in lieu of an ACT or an SAT. And if you don't do well on that placement test, then you're going to be assigned remedial or development course work that you're going to have to do. And it is important to know that the college does not guarantee the cost is going to be covered on that. Most of the time it's not. So that's going to be an additional expense that people need to be aware about. And then, of course, what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, you still need to maintain SAP to stay in good standing. Your federal financial aid will apply. So if it's accredited school. So if you're getting, FSCOG, Federal Direct Student Loan, Pell Grant, like that will apply. So that's nice to know. And it just can be excellent option for students with a poor experience in high school, but they still want to go to college, or they're a late bloomer, or they don't have any money, or they're a terrible tester. And sometimes I work with families and they're like, we just don't have money and we're not taking on any loans. And I'm like, well, you probably can't stay on, if you don't get a bunch of scholarships, you can't stay on the dorm unless you either do one of these things, right? And so sometimes I end up sending students there. Like, for example, there's a school in Atlanta Metropolitan. I actually just toured there 2 days ago. And it serves somewhat as an open enrollment school. Not quite. I call it a quasi-open enrollment school. They do have a 2.5 GPA requirement, but they'll take students. They, you don't have to take the test. It's a commuter school. Guess how much just tuition is, Anika? Just tuition. Now, there's still fees.
I don't know. You got me.
$2,000.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So people they don't have any money at all, or they don't have the grades and they can't afford it. I actually work with the family that makes over $150,000, but they've adjusted their lifestyle to that. So they don't have any money. And they're actually thinking about going there for a couple of years and transferring to a 4-year school. All the stuff transfers in. So a little bit of the history of open enrollment. the open enrollment movement really began in the second half of the 20th century. It had many ties to the civil rights movement, actually. So it started in California and New York, and it was sort of on the forefront of making college accessible to all high school grads. So the CUNY system, the City of New York system, they really started it in the 1970s. And it was an action that greatly increased enrollment, particularly to Hispanic and Black students. Now, since then, CUNY has moved away from that. Sort of the business ideals have clashed with the cost of open enrollment. So CUNY is no longer an open enrollment school. But that's a little bit of the history of it. But it's important to know the reality of open enrollment is that you still do, need to maintain their GPA requirements to stay in. Okay. And you need to look at how your credits transfer if you're looking at transferring, because you can do it as a 2-year or a 4-year school. So that's important to know. And guaranteed admission to an open enrollment college doesn't always mean that a student can take any courses. A lot of times there's long lines to take in and get in certain courses. And so those are, just some things about open admission, open enrollment, guaranteed enrollment, whatever darn name you want to call it. What do you think, Anika?
I learned something totally new today. I had no idea. Seriously, I had no idea. I thought you went in a totally different direction with open enrollment.
Well, I'm glad you learned something new. I'm hoping you learned something new. That makes me happy.
Yeah, that was awesome. Awesome.
Now, let me say this. A lot of times open admission schools are not without their critics. Okay.
All right.
Because you think, oh, this is great. Like, you're providing low cost education for people that didn't get in the other schools, right? You sounds great, but they have their critics. Part of the criticism is because they tend to have low graduation rates, right? Because you're accepting weaker students, so you're going to have lower graduation rates. And a lot of times, to be honest, schools have gone to being an open admission school, not because it was their mission to serve a certain sector of the population, but just to be honest, they couldn't get enough people to enroll.
Oh, wow.
Like, they couldn't get enough people to enroll. So they basically just changed their standards and became an open admission school.
Ooh.
And so, so that does happen. And so those are some of the criticisms, because sometimes the graduation rates, I've seen them be under 10%, as far as the graduation rate. So final thoughts. What do you think?
I think we know now.
That's your way of saying, Mark, you're a talker, but stop talking right now because you're entering into information overload territory.
Bingo. No, I'm just kidding.
That's what happens when you have like 57 episodes under your belt. You can read someone's mind. Okay, friends, hopefully you have heard part 1 and part 2 of my interview with my lifelong friend and brother, Dr. David Williams. And you've heard us say that he's going to talk about what you need to know about being a doctor and a nurse. And maybe if you're interested in the nursing, maybe like, what's up with that? Because everything's been about the doc. Well, today is the day he turns his attention to nursing. And he's going to really break down a lot of things for us in this episode. He's going to talk about why he's so bullish on opportunities in the field of nursing. He's going to talk about some of the challenges that nurses face. He's going to talk about the different types of nursing careers that are out there and the education that you need for those nursing jobs. And he's going to talk about the versatility of the nursing profession. So very excited, and I hope you listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
So, Dave, I have a question for you about nursing, because I know just in our past conversations, you seem to be very bullish on nursing, even as a pathway to being a doctor. So maybe I'll broaden the question. And are there alternative paths to being a doctor besides the traditional route that you would advocate?
Absolutely. There are multiple ways that you can be involved in the healthcare field. Nursing is probably one of the best. Number one, no matter what happens in terms of technological innovation, increased roboticization, artificial intelligence, we will always need nurses because they are the ultimate hands-on. There's a reason why nursing, as well as teaching, year in, year out, is the most highly regarded field in America, because that's your interface with the human component. That who's changing your bedpans, who's putting in the IVs, who's drawing your blood, who's taking your vitals, who's actually there to tuck you in, make sure you're comfortable, administer your pain medications, take care of your parent who's elderly with Alzheimer's or so forth, it's the nurse. And that's why there's such a massive nursing shortage that is going to continue and be exacerbated in the future, because as our population ages, we are going to need more and more nurses. So the fact is, if you become a nurse, you will be quite well paid and you will always have a job anywhere in this country, and in fact, in most places of the world. So there's very few fields that I can think of other than nursing, which is going to give you that type of flexibility. But number two, even after you become a nurse, there are multiple career pathways that you can take as a nurse to go on and increase your compensation and increase your involvement in a variety of fields. Number one, nurse practitioner. A nurse practitioner does much the same things as a physician assistant. You can call them a doctor light. A nurse practitioner can be trained to be working in an emergency department side by side with a doctor. She could work in a family practice setting. She can work in a surgical setting. Usually, to be a nurse practitioner, it requires a BA in nursing, 1 or 2 years of experience, and then 2 additional years. And many nurse practitioner fields compensate to the 6 figures. So that's a tremendous opportunity. The second one is business and administration. Increasingly, the majority of positions in hospitals, administrative positions, vice president of multiple fields in the hospital, are run by nurses. And so nurses go on and get MBAs, they get Masters of Public Health or Administration, and they go on to actually later become heads of hospitals. And all the middle management structures of hospitals, most of them are run by nurses. And then, of course, nurses can go on to do other things as well, whether it's in business or in international public affairs and so forth. So I can't emphasize what a great career nursing is. And lastly, there's 2 tracks to nursing. You can do 2 years of nursing and get a basic nursing degree, or you can do 4 years and get a bachelor's in nursing. But the fact is right out of high school, you can apply to be a nurse, and inside of 4 years, you can be making anywhere from $60,000 to $100,000. And you have all these other career pathways we have already described. So I can't think of many other fields out there that have as many opportunities as nursing does at this point in time.
Dave, sometimes when I look at nursing, it almost feels like alphabet soup. I mean, you have the LPNs, the RNs, the BSNs, and others. Can you break down the differences between these various types of nurses for us?
It is very confusing. In fact, I have to confess that I went to Rasmussen's website. They have an excellent College of Nursing introduction, and it explained the 4 different types of nursing degrees. It also explained the salary levels and the projected growth rates. So based on that information, I'm very happy to introduce the 4 different levels of nursing.
Go for it.
Great. Well, the first one is nursing assistants, also known as CNAs, which stands for Certified Nursing Assistants. CNAs are considered many times the front line of contact between the medical staff and patients. They assist the patients in the daily activities, which include bathing the patients, helping them dress, eating and using the bathrooms. They measure vital signs and listen to the patient's health concerns. Some nursing assistants in certain states may also dispense medications. The nursing assistant's median salary in 2017 is projected to be about $27,000, and its projected employment growth rate is about 11%. And to become a CNA, one must complete a state-approved education program that usually lasts between 3 to 8 weeks, depending on whether it's a full or part-time program. And then upon completion of the program, aspiring nursing assistants must pass an exam to earn their CNA or related title.
Well, you know what? That could be, I mean, if someone's flipping burgers and making, 8, 9, 10, 11 an hour, that's still an upgrade compensation wise. And I'm sure it comes with benefits to go from that to, a couple grand a month.
Exactly. And the important thing to realize with these nursing degrees is These are degrees that you can pursue directly out of college. Directly out of high school. So there's no downtime. And the great thing about it is once you achieve one nursing level, you can easily transition to the next one.
So tell us the next one then. Let's hear it.
LPN, the licensed practical nurse. LPNs, sometimes known as the licensed vocational nurses, are responsible for a variety of patient duties. They monitor patient health and administer basic care, and their tasks include things like taking blood pressure, inserting IV catheters, starting drips, and communicating with the patients regarding the educational plan. The median salary in 2017 of LPNs was $45,000, and the projected growth rate in the next 10 years is 12%. In order to get an LPN, you have to successfully complete a practical nursing diploma program. These programs can usually be found at technical schools, community colleges, or career colleges, and can usually be completed in as few as 12 months. After graduation, you're required to pass the National Council License Examination called the NCLEX to receive your license and be qualified to work.
That's actually a great opportunity too, because you're talking about 1 year, 1.5 years max.
Yeah.
And you can really have a marketable skill, and you're making around $1,000 a week, there. So, that could be, especially for someone that maybe, even someone that may want to go back to school, they're a dead-end job, but they can't conceive of a 4-year commitment.
Exactly. And there's additional certification that's also available for nurses at the LPN level. And these certifications show that an LPN has an advanced level of knowledge about a specific subject. And this could be things like developmental disabilities, childbirth, IV therapy. And to gain an edge in the job market or require some specialty training, many LPNs can actually take that specialty training and gain additional edge in the marketplace. The third group is the registered nurse. And registered RN. And registered nurses tend to be the group most people associate with the term nurse. They assume a wide variety of roles in patient care. They're responsible for taking medical history, monitoring symptoms and medical equipment, administering medicine, and establishing or contributing to a plan of care. Some RNs are responsible for overseeing LPNs and CNAs and other healthcare staff. The median salary of an RN can be as high as $70,000. Their projected growth rate is 15%, and there are 2 educational paths to becoming an RN. You can earn an associate degree in nursing or earn a Bachelor of Science in nursing. A typical associate degree in nursing program can be completed in as few as 18 months. On the other hand, earning your Bachelor of Science in nursing can be done in about 33 months, or as few as 18 months with a prior degree under your belt. So this is all very technical, but the bottom line is a registered nurse, 3 to 4 years. It's like getting a bachelor's degree as an undergraduate student, but you're getting it in nursing.
Do you have the growth rate for that one? Because I'm really glad you shared the growth rate. I think you had the others around 11 or 12% for the RN.
This one and the next, between 2016 and 2026, it's projected to be 15%.
Okay, great.
Okay.
And what's our last one? Because you said 4, and I'm counting here. I can count. Okay. I'm up to 3, so I noticed you're going up with degrees and credentials.
Well, the last one, they group nurse practitioners and nurse anesthetists in the final group, which they refer to as advanced practice registered nurses, also known as APRNs. And nurses who earn their Master's of Science in Nursing can become advanced practice registered nurses. These nurses have all sorts of options when it comes to career choices. They can work independently as well in collaboration with other physicians. And for a better idea of how these nurses fit into the healthcare system, the American Nurses Association offers highlights of the 4 types of advanced practice nurses. They are, number 1, nurse anesthetists, number 2, nurse midwives, number 3, certified nurse practitioners, and number 4, clinical nurse specialists. So the annual salary of any one of these pathways is projected to be well into the six figures. One quote here has $110,000. But here's the amazing thing. The projected employment of advanced practice nurses in the next 10 years is 31%, which is phenomenal.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize like how
Yeah.
important that is because
Yeah.
what that means is one, you can have an extreme level of confidence you're not going to be unemployed, but also you've got supply and demand working for you. And when supply and demand is working for you, like really good things can happen, whether it's bonuses or your ability to dictate some of your terms of your job. It's just a lot of benefits to being in a high demand field.
That's correct. And I can certainly say that the one advantage that nursing has over medicine is that there are virtually no geographic restrictions to the demand curve with nurses. In many fields of medicine, there are saturations that occur, specifically in some major cities and major areas such as the Pacific Northwest. That is not so much the case in nursing. So you definitely do have more geographic flexibility becoming a nurse or an advanced practice nurse as opposed to a physician. And how to become an advanced practice nurse? Well, the first step is you usually become a registered nurse. Okay. Most of these programs require candidates to first have an RN license, with most preferring the Bachelor of Science in Nursing. The next step is to gain acceptance into an accredited MSN program and earn your degree.
And that's Masters of Science in Nursing, right? MSN?
Master of Science of Nursing. And for certain fields such as nurse anesthetists and nurse practitioners, it is getting somewhat competitive. So they're usually requiring 1 or 2 years to 3 years of actual real nursing experience before you actually apply.
So Dave, we talked about the explosive growth rate. Are you noticing a trend at all in underfunded hospitals, rural hospitals, or maybe even other hospitals to have nurses do some of the things that doctors used to do, or physician's assistants as well? Is that one of the reasons why you're seeing the growth of the field, or does that not explain it? Or is that irrelevant? What do you think?
Well, absolutely. In fact, you're not just seeing it in rural hospitals. You're seeing it in every setting, whether it is tertiary care academic centers or community hospitals. It falls under the heading of physician extenders. And the first thing is because it makes economic sense. In many cases, it's more efficient and cost effective to employ one physician and 2 physician extenders, whether they are physician assistants or nurse practitioners or nurse anesthetists, than it is to try and recruit 2 or 3 doctors to do that same job. So that's number one. But number two, it's also more efficient to spend 4 to 6 years training a nurse anesthetist than the 12 years that it takes to train an anesthesiologist. So I think that's why we're going to see an increasing emphasis on physician extenders to fill in a lot of the gaps in healthcare service going forward.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
The recommended resource for episode 57 is the book, The K&W Guide to Colleges for Students with Learning Differences, 14th edition. 338 schools with programs or services for students with ADHD, ASD, or learning differences. Now, if you have a student with learning differences, you are going to want to meet with the Learning Center and Disability Services, but you also are going to want to purchase the K&W Guide to Colleges for Students with Learning Differences. And that's our recommended resource for episode 57. The book has profiles on more than 350 schools with targeted information on services and admissions and policies and admissions requirements, graduation policies for learning disability programs. The book has these outstanding, detailed descriptions. It's just got a wealth of information in their profiles, which is really the heart of the book, because it's here where they describe their programs and their services that they have in place for students with learning disabilities. And they will actually list the name of the service, the phone number, the email for disability support and services, and they'll let you know whether extra time is permitted for specific learning differences. So if you have a child with learning differences, or if you are a college counselor, you are going to want to get the K&W Guide to Colleges for Students with Learning Differences. Are regarded as a must-have resource. And the book is by Mary Beth Kravitz and Amy Wax. And I can't recommend it more highly. Let's now resume my interview with my lifetime friend, Dr. David Williams. So let's face it, no career is utopia. We all know that. Every job, every profession, every career, it's got its challenging aspects, possibly even its undesirable aspects.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've been working in tandem with nurses for your whole medical career. You've had lots of conversations with them. What are the difficulties of the job? What are the things that nurses complain about when you have a conversation with them about their job?
Well, I think the main thing that differentiates nurses from doctors is autonomy. And so sometimes nurses do complain that they don't have as much independence as doctors do, especially if you're in the advanced nursing track. You usually have to work under a physician license. For that reason, you do have a subset of nurses that eventually decide that they want to go on to medical school. And the reasons often cited is that they want to have the autonomy to operate under their own license and not that of the physician. But to be honest with you, other than that major complaint, I actually don't think that there are too many downsides to nursing that are generally voiced. Sometimes if there is some issue that, at least in the lower levels of nursing, taking care of patients' bodily needs and a lot of the menial, I don't want to say menial tasks, but the basic tasks can get tiresome after a while. But the wonderful thing with nursing is there's always the opportunity to continue to train and to continue to explore other avenues of healthcare if one particular level gets tiresome.
Now, are you doctors as bad as they say? Because I've heard, nurses say in the past that you got to deal with the doctor's God complex. I've heard that said more than once. Is that like folklore? Is there any truth to that?
There was some truth to that, I think, in the past. But doctors have been somewhat cut down to size. It's very hard to have a God complex these days, because I think that the understanding of the physician and nursing's relationship has changed. And in many ways, we see each other as much more on a peer level than we ever did before. And there's much more emphasis on mutual respect. So while I do think that might be an issue, I don't think it's as prevalent as it was in the past.
Cool. So Dave, what if a nurse wants to be a doctor? You've talked about that. Like, what's that path look like for them?
Well, it's very interesting. My personal experience, and I've known quite a few nurses who have become doctors, is that I think they make fantastic physicians, for the obvious reason that they have so much experience firsthand in delivering health care. And I think they make very interesting candidates. All of the nurses that I know that have decided to pursue medicine have been successful in that pursuit. And my understanding is that the medical schools have looked very, very favorably on their candidacy. The only issue I think that comes up now in some interviews is that many nurses who are asked in the process, why are you choosing medicine other than another advanced practice track such as nurse anesthetist or nurse practitioner? And many times the answer does come down to the issue of autonomy, that nurses who choose medicine just decide that they would like to have the independence that comes with operating under your own license, as opposed to having to operate closely with a physician.
I think one thing with nursing, Dave, is it feels to me, and this is based on lots of conversations with students and quite honestly, my own self, like as well, that it feels like it's one of those professions that people would sort of self-select out, because if you know that you can't stand the sight of blood or can't stand some of those things, you probably are able to discern that before you get deep all the way into it. Would you agree with that or not?
Well, yes, but I also think that the whole issue of blood and bodily fluids is probably overblown. Yes, there's some aspect of that. It's hard to escape blood when you're putting in IVs, and the reality is you're going to be changing bedpans and taking care of patients' basic needs. But people have to be cognizant of the fact that that's just one aspect of nursing, and many nurses go on to get Masters of Business Administration, Masters of Public Health. Many nurses go on to become a nurse anesthetists or nurse midwives, though there's a lot of bodily fluids in that field as well. And so if you have the ambition to continue the pathway of lifelong education, you can easily take nursing into so many different levels that eventually you may not have to see blood. You can actually be the head of a hospital and let other people take care of those other functions. So you have a lot of options going forward if you're patient and dedicated to see them through.
I have to ask you about this one. I was on the plane traveling somewhere. Don't ask me where, don't ask me when, but I know it was around 15 years ago. And I strike up a conversation, and I'm with someone who described themselves as like a travel nurse. And they didn't work that many days a month, but they were sent into these remote locations. Are you familiar with that? I thought it was fascinating, but I never went back and studied it at all.
Absolutely. That's been going on for a long time. What happens is once you become a nurse, many nurses discover that hospitals and hospital systems will pay them to relocate temporarily or full time to other states where there might be nursing shortages. And you'd be shocked where these nursing shortages are. They're pretty much everywhere. So I've known nurses that live in Boston who will take a travel assignment of anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks to months in Los Angeles, and then they'll go to San Francisco, and then they'll go to San Diego, and they spend the time traveling the country, taking temporary travel assignments at a variety of hospitals. There are also opportunities to do that internationally. I've known nurses that have worked, and doctors as well, in places like Australia and New Zealand, or parts of Asia, or Dubai, taking assignments, working with a variety of hospitals, hospital systems, and academic programs. So if you have the wanderlust in you and you want to travel, once again, nursing is an excellent avenue to do it.
Last question. I've also known nurses that were almost like home based. It's almost like they worked from home, and then they went out and did like home visits, close to where they lived, and they didn't have the stress of like fighting traffic. And they say this is such a high quality of life compared to the hustle and bustle. Have you seen that sort of role before?
Absolutely. And the reality is as our population ages, one of the biggest fields is actually taking care of the elderly, and that nurses play a huge role because there are many programs that have nurses visit patients' homes and take care of actual patients at their particular home. So many nurses can work from their home and then travel to throughout their own neighborhoods or throughout parts of the city or the community, taking care of the patients and commuting from their home. So they never have to step foot actually in a hospital to take care of their job in that field.
This is great. I tell you what, all the times now when I'm working with my students and they tell me they want to be a nurse, I'm going to say, you need to go listen to my friend, Dr. David Williams, break it down. Episode 57, play, listen. Anything else you want to add on nursing, Dave, or you think we covered it?
I think we covered it.
Next week in the news, they're not fact checking how lies in college applications can slip through the net. And we'll be in chapter 58 of 171 answers. And it's all about demonstrated interest and why it's important. And next week's question asks if supplemental essay prompts for the Ivy League colleges change every year. And it'll be the final part of Mark's interview with Dr. David Williams. So you want to be a doctor or a nurse? What you need to know.
And friends, I have to tell you, we have some great stories in that final interview because Dr. Williams has some brushes with celebrities and greatness. So I asked him to tell some of those stories. I think it's a little more of a casual interview, but I think you'll like it.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. And if you found this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that could really use this information. Your College Bound Kid is produced by John Lockenbaugh. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Artwork is by Andrea Togo. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. If you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340.
And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like for us to answer on the show, please email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. That's questions with an S at yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions, so send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, which is just simply yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.